Okay, good morning. We are going to hopefully wrap up chapter 14 this morning of our series in the Revelation. And the last several weeks I've highlighted the fact that we're in an extended pause in the chronological nature of the way the book is laid out. It gives us the seals and then the trumpets. And in between number 6 and number 7 of each of these seals, trumpets, and bowls, which we'll get to next week, there is this little pause, and it interjects some other part of the story. And so this morning we're finishing up this last kind of one of these pauses, and it is in the end of Revelation 14. And the topic is the reaping of the earth. A lot of imagery. It's one of those that's you got to kind of wade your way through and figure out what's been talked about here. So let's do that. And to start off, I'll just read this section for us so that we kind of have the whole picture in mind, and then we'll kind of digest it a little at a time as we generally do. So it says, "Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and seated on the cloud, one like a son of man, with a gold crown on his head, and a sharp sickle in his hand. And another angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, 'Put in your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is full ripe.' So he who sat on the cloud swung his sickle across the earth, and the earth was reaped. Then another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar, and the angel who has authority over the fire, and he called with a loud voice to the one who had the sharp sickle, 'Put in your sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, for its grapes are ripe.' So the angel swung his sickle across the earth and gathered the grape harvest of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and the blood flowed from the winepress as high as the horse's bridle for 1,600 stadia." So let's just kind of digest our way through this a little at a time. It says here at the very beginning, "Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and seated on the white cloud, one like a son of man." So on your sheet there, I have a couple of questions we're going to kind of set in our mind, and then we'll go find those answers. But it says, who is the one like a son of man? And then why is he seated on a white cloud? So those are kind of the first two things that come to mind as we read that first bit. This is really, the imagery here is drawn from Daniel chapter 7. It says, "I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man. And he came to the Ancient of Days, and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, with all peoples, nations, languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which should not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed." And we know from having seen this Daniel passage in the past, this is Christ, the one like the Son of Man, and he is before the Father, the Ancient of Days. And this passage is talking about at a point in the future, Christ will be given the earth as his kingdom, and it will be an everlasting kingdom. And that is about to happen. And so John, knowing Daniel's prophecy, goes back and pulls forward that imagery to help us connect these two events, the one that's talked about here in Daniel and what we're about to see here. And so that's partly why you see this language. I also want you to see this. In Matthew 24, Jesus speaking said, "Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So he describes his coming with clouds and great glory and power. And then another instance where he does that here in Mark 13. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory. So I want you to see that. One other thing here to note, when you are at the very beginning of the book of Revelation, chapter 1, John says, John to the, well, it starts off just talking about John, but I think this is him he's writing and he's announcing that it's him. John to the 7 churches that are in Asia, grace to you and peace from him who is and who was to come, and from the 7 spirits who are before his throne, and from Jesus Christ. So he very clearly states out this is from Jesus, right? The faithful witness, the firstborn of the dead, the ruler of kings on earth, to him who loves us, who has freed us from our sins by his blood, and made us a kingdom, priest to his God and Father, to him be glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. Then, behold, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him. So again, it's another depiction of Christ coming with clouds. So there's a lot of that imagery spread through the New Testament. So I really think what's being depicted here is that, let me answer this question. Who is the one like the Son of Man? He is the glorified Christ. So I'm going to explain that a little bit further as we move into this, but that's who he is. He is the glorified Christ. And why is he seated on a white cloud is because Jesus is often shown coming in his power and glory on clouds, and he's seated because he's in control. Every time you see God or Jesus seated, there's an authoritativeness about that. It's meant to depict him in control or authority. So you pull all that imagery together, and it's simply a way for John to help us identify this is Jesus. He's coming in power and great glory, and there is no rush about him. He's not being pushed into this. He is seated. He's in complete control. That's really kind of what's being seen there. Let me see if I can get my screen to switch. This thing gives me fits sometimes. Well, I'm not going to be able to get it to switch. I have a way of seeing multiple screens or just one, and it's stuck on one, so that's fine. All right. I was trying to leave that up so you guys could keep writing, but so let me show you this. This is that same Revelation 14 we were just looking at, but it says one like a Son of Man. I don't know if you picked up on that, but my question is, why does it not say the Son of Man, right? Why is it like a Son of Man? That's a little unusual. And as you listen to different commentators, most of them will say, I don't know. So, I mean, honestly, we don't know. But I'm going to take a guess as to why I think it's that way. And I'll show you why. So why does it say like a Son of Man? So this is back to that Daniel 7. And I saw in the night vision, and behold, the clouds of heaven, there came one like a Son of Man. So part of why he's doing it is because he's trying to make that connection back to Daniel. So that's part of it. It's like a quote from Daniel to draw our attention to it. Here, this is the one in Revelation chapter 1. He's just talked about Jesus earlier. Then he says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet saying, write what you see in a book and send it to the 7 churches, to Ephesus and to Smyrna, to Pergama and to Thyatira and to Sardis and to Philadelphia and to Laodicea. So that's Jesus. He's telling John what to do. Then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me. So he's turning to see Christ, and on turning I saw 7 golden lampstands, and in the midst of the lampstands one like a Son of Man. This phrase, the Son of Man, is used twice in Revelation. These are the 2 instances, and both times John says, like the Son of Man, not the Son of Man. So that's something to note. This would be consistent for him to do it in Revelation 14 because he's done it here in Revelation 1. That doesn't really answer the question. In other words, okay, so why did he do it here, right? So why isn't he saying the Son of Man in both cases as opposed to neither case? Let me show you the only other instance in the New Testament where Jesus is being described, he's being seen in heaven. Okay? So every time in the New Testament, it's used countless times, it's Jesus' favorite self-identifier. He calls himself the Son of Man a lot. It's not often that you have someone else call him that, and when they do, it's generally like this. There's Peter and Jesus standing on a beach, There's only 3 instances where there's someone looking into heaven and seeing the glorified Christ. This is the other one. Now, when they heard these things, this is the account of Stephen being stoned. Now, when they heard these things, they were enraged, and they ground their teeth at him. But he, full of the Holy Spirit, gazed into heaven and saw the glory of God, and Jesus standing at the right hand of God. And he said, Behold, I see the heavens open, and the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God. But they cried out with a loud voice, stopped their ears, and rushed together to him. They cast him out of the city and stoned him. And the witnesses laid down their garments at the feet of a young man named Saul. So, why does this one say the Son of Man? And I think when you see this, here's my stab at it. John, Jesus is arguably his best friend, right? He sees Jesus every day for 3 years. He knows Jesus. That's not the one I remember. He looks different. He's glowing with white hair and a golden sash, and right? If you go back a couple verses, and we see this clothed in a long robe with a golden sash on his chest, and it goes on, lies of fire, and right? So that's what he's seeing. My point to you would be, in his glorified body, he does look similar. He can tell it's him, but he's different. So he's like the Son of Man that I knew, but he's not exactly like. So he's like a Son of Man. I think that's part of it. Here's the other thing. When you look at this one with, I keep drawing a blank on this guy's name, Stephen. He's saying this for the benefit of those stoning him. He needs no ambiguity here. There needs to be incredibly clear what he's saying. And what he's saying is, I'm seeing Jesus at the right hand of the Father. So he uses the title, by the direction of the Holy Spirit, I believe, to make sure these men know what's happening. I mean, it's for their judgment, their benefit. They are the ones that need to realize he's seeing into heaven and there's the Son of Man. Okay, so that's why I think it's different. That's why you see this difference. It's not something to get hung up on, and many do, and that's the reason I wanted to take a few minutes for us to see that. So that's the answer. In his glorified body, he does look similar but different. We just talked about some funerals this morning. I don't think this should be lost on us. When you get to heaven and you are a glorified body, you will be similar but different. Recognizable. You will know each other. You'll know that was, and in a supernatural way, I think. Brenda and I lost a child to miscarriage. Obviously never saw or met that child, but I think when I get to heaven, I'll know who they are, right? So there's that about this. Don't miss the fact that even in his glorified state, he's clearly recognizable as who he is. So he's seeing Christ seated on a cloud, and he has a golden crown on his head. Just a quick note about this. There's two crowns in the New Testament. There's Stephanos, which is the wreath-type crown. It's not a royal crown. It's an award for conquering or for winning a race. That's the crown. This isn't Jesus' kingly crown. It's his. He's the victor here. He's coming in victory. He is coming in to take the earth, is what he's doing. And a sharp sickle in his hand. One of the reasons I was late this morning, I had some stomach issues, but also it hit me this morning. This sickle issue. What is this? And I keep thinking of this huge, big blade, right? That's actually a scythe, or a scythe. I don't know how you pronounce it. A sickle is actually, you've probably seen them at garage sales, it's this little handle with a hooked blade. But when you go into the Greek here, what it says is hooked, a pruning hook is what's being talked about. It's a hooked blade used for pruning or for clearing grain. And you can clear wheat with a little sickle, but they've been using scythes since about 4000 BC, and it's a hooked blade as well. So I don't know that we can say this is a scythe or if it's a little hand sickle, right? I don't know. The scythe makes far more sense to me. I think what's being depicted here in either case is a rapid, efficient reaping. That's what's being talked about. I watched a quick video and it shows this guy out there reaping grain with his little sickle. And in about a minute, he had moved about the size of the table, and his buddy with the scythe had wiped out that side of the room. Okay, I mean, it's dramatically different. I don't foresee Jesus coming in and, right? I think it's more like, okay? So with that imagery, now think about this. What is he's getting ready to talk about the harvesting of grain. Keep this in mind as we move through. We're going to read it. In Matthew, there's this parable about wheat and tares and the harvesting of them. He describes them as people. The stalks of grain or grass or tares, they're people. We're talking about of people. So what I want you to grasp is this is not him coming in and taking out people. It is just mass devastation on a rapid scale. That's what's being depicted by the sickle. Think of the thing that came to mind. There's a movie I saw a clip from, and it's a war film, and these guys are all shooting back and forth at each other, and all of a sudden they get to this one part, and their buddies show up in a river gunboat and turn on one of these, cannons that shoots 50,000 rounds a second type of thing. And there's like three of them, just, and you can't hear individual shot. In a war setting, that's a sigh. I mean, that's just devastation. That's kind of what's being described here in a agricultural sense. You'll understand why I use the war analogy, I think, by the time we're done this morning. And another angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, "Put in your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is full ripe." They say full ripe because there's a word used for ripe that means it's ready for harvest, and there's a different word used for past due. It is so ripe, it's now not worth harvesting. It needs to be cut off and just thrown in the fire. Think of rotten grapes or in wheat. If you've ever seen a field that didn't get harvested in the fall, and you're there and you see it in the spring and everything's fall, that's full ripe. That's what's being described here. So the word imagery here is this is long overdue for being harvested. Think the graciousness, the long-sufferingness of God. That's what's being depicted there. He's coming in for harvest, but he has waited longer than he should have in mercy. That's the thing to pick up there. He comes out of the temple. There is a temple in heaven. All these things that we see, whether it's the altar or the temple or whatever, on earth, those are all replicas of these things that we have seen in heaven as we've worked our way through this. So there's the full ripe comment. So he who sat on the cloud swung his sickle across the earth, and the earth was reaped. Jesus reaps the earth. What is meant by the earth was reaped? Let's look at this passage here in Matthew 13. And he put another parable before them, saying, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared also. And the servants of the master of the house came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have weeds? And he said to them, an enemy has done this. So the servants said to him, then do you want us to go and gather them? But he said, no, lest the gathering of the weeds, you root up the wheat along with them. Let both grow together until the harvest, and at the harvest time I will tell the reapers, gather the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be gathered, but gather the wheat into my barn. So he tells this story, and then a few verses later, he explains. So let's see that. Then he left the crowds and went into the house, and his disciples came with him, saying, explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field. And he answered, the one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed is the sons of the kingdom. The weeds are the sons of the evil one. The enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. Just as the weeds are gathered and burned with fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all causes of sin and all lawbreakers, and throw them into the fiery furnace, in that place where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has an ear, let him hear. So we see this idea at the very end of the age, which we're at. He will send out these angels, and they will gather up all the wheat, all the tares, all the unrighteous, and he will throw them into the fire of judgment. So this he's telling us here in Matthew, and then in Revelation, John is again pulling this imagery forward and describing that for us. So I think what's meant by the earth is reaped is the judgment of God has come upon the ungodly. It's been long suffering. It's been waiting. As you've been going through this series of Revelation, you've seen just incredible opportunities for people to turn and to repent. They have the 2 witnesses. They have the 144,000 witnesses. They have the angel flying all over the world, speaking in every language to every tribe and people, the gospel. There is no reason left. This is sheer heart rebellion. I will not bend the knee. And as he's let that go and go and go and go, he's finally enough. And he's come in and he's done that. I have here at the end possibly the 7 bold judgments. I think that's what's being described, and we'll look at that next time. But I put possibly because speculation a bit, but I think that's what's being described. So we jump to the second half of this section, and it says, then another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar, the angel who has authority over the fire. Instead of reading this whole thing, let's just take it a piece at a time. So there's another angel who comes out of the temple in heaven, and he also has this sharp sickle. The other thing, this one's about grapes harvested. So again, hooked pruning could be two different implements, and they're both hooked pruning or hooked harvesting knives. And another angel, this is a different one, he comes out from the altar, the angel who has authority over fire. It's an interesting description. So I have the question, what is that? What's that mean? What are we talking about there? If we go back to Revelation 8, this may be familiar to you. It says, "And another angel came out and stood at the altar with a golden censer, and he was given much incense to offer with the prayers of all the saints on the golden altar before the throne. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints rose before God from the angel, or from the hand of the angel. Then the angel took the censer and filled it with fire from the altar and threw it to the earth. And there were peals of thunder, rumblings, flashings of lightning, and an earthquake. Now the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared to blow them." This is the opening salvo of these first 7 trumpets. And so what you see is this angel there at the altar, and he's the one having incense and the prayers of the saints, and he's at the altar with the fire. And I think this is that angel, is my point. I think this is the angel we're now hearing about in Revelation 14. He's the one that has control of the fire and the altar. And he's the one working with the prayers of the saints and the incense and the fire, right? So you see that. So here, I just kind of walk through this quickly now that you've got it in your mind. He was given much incense to offer with the prayer of the saints at the golden altar, the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints, and then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and threw it to the earth. So what I want you to capture here is the fact that this angel is connected with fire and the incense and the prayers of the saints. That's kind of what's being described here. So let's jump forward back 2 chapters, and we see this. "When he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls who had been slain for the word of God and for the witness they had borne. They cried out with a loud voice, 'O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you will judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth?'" What are those prayers here? Their prayer for vengeance. They're not going to do it. They're wanting God to do it, right? Which is righteous. Let him be the one that avenges. But these prayers are the prayers of the righteous that say, "God, bring judgment on the wicked," right? That's been going on for thousands of years. For thousands of years, the righteous pray that God will judge the wicked. What I want you to think about is what we're going to be looking at this morning in this reaping of the earth. These people that are left at this point are not your Aunt Sally, okay? They are Ted Bundy, or they are, Hitler. They are folks that have had every opportunity and are absolutely wicked and have absolutely refused every offer of salvation. And they are defiant in the face of God. And he has had enough. And the prayers of the saints start to be answered here, is what's happening. So back to this main text. I think what's being described here is there seems to be a connection between the prayer of the saints and the judgment that is to come. What's about to happen, and I think that it's in the bowl judgments that you'll see it, it's God bringing the answer to that prayer of Revelation 6. How long, O Lord? No longer. We've waited long enough. Here we go. And if you have ever experienced, or by proxy experienced, a great crime against you or your family, rape, murder, something significant, and that person gets justice, that's a good day. you don't want to celebrate their death, but there's something good about justice coming to those who have done evil. That's appropriate for us to say, good, right? That's what's happening here. So don't miss that as we see the bloodbath that's about to occur. And we, as saints who pray for that justice, are a part of that. So this angel that has authority over the fire, and he called with a loud voice to the one who had the sharp sickle. Put in your sickle and gather the clusters from the vine of the earth, for its grapes are ripe. Again, the word ripe there is very ripe. These are grapes that have had a big rainstorm and they're swollen they're just ready to pop. They're again, it's this overripe idea. It's the idea of a long-suffering, patient God. So the angel swung his sickle across the earth and gathered the grape harvest of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. So what is meant by the great winepress of the wrath of God? What's being described there? It's interesting how this winepress idea is not new here. I mean, again, he's going back and pulling forward all these prior prophecies that he wants to connect here. So if we go to Joel 3, it says, proclaim this among the nations, consecrate for war, stir up the mighty men, let all the men of war draw near. Let them come up. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am a warrior. Hasten and come, all you surrounding nations, and gather yourselves there. Bring down your warriors, O Lord. Let the nations stir themselves up and come to the valley of Jehoshaphat. For there I will sit to judge all the surrounding nations. So he's really just calling all these nations and people who have been in rebellion. He's saying, bring it on, come on, let's go. And he's bringing them all to this great battle. That's what's being described here. If we keep reading, put in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Go in, tread, for the winepress is full. The vats overflow, for the evil is great. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. The sun and the moon are darkened, and the stars withdraw their shine. The Lord roars from Zion and utters his voice from Jerusalem, and the heavens and the earth quake, but the Lord is a refuge to his people, a stronghold to the people of Israel. It's this just grand imagery of God coming and setting up this battle, and he uses this winepress analogy. Put in the sickle, the harvest is ripe. Tread out the winepress, right? So we see that there. Isaiah 63. Who is this who comes from Eden, in crimsoned garments from Basra? He who is splendid in his apparel, marching in the greatness of his strength. It is I, speaking in righteousness, mighty to save. Why is your apparel red and your garment like him who tread in the winepress? I have trodden the winepress alone, and from the people no one was with me. I trod them in my anger, trampled them in my wrath. Their lifeblood splattered on my garments and stained all my apparel. For the day of vengeance was in my heart, and my year of redemption has come. I looked, but there was no one to help. I was appalled, but there was no one to uphold. So my own arm brought me salvation, and my wrath upheld me. I trampled down the peoples in my anger. I made them drunk in my wrath, and I poured out their lifeblood on the earth. Any thoughts as to who's speaking there? That's in quotes. I have trodden out the winepress alone.
Sounds like Christ.
That's Jesus. It's a description of what we're seeing described here in imagery in 14, and you will see in bloody detail toward the end of Revelation. What's amazing is this, Revelation 19. This is the one that's famous. We've all read this. To see the connection between Isaiah and Revelation. It says, "Then I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse. The one sitting on it called Faithful and True. In righteousness he judges and makes war. His eyes are like a flame of fire, and on his head are many diadems." That's a royal crown. "And he has a name written that no one knows but himself. He is clothed in a robe dipped in blood." Why? Because he's been in Basra stamping out people. Right? "Who has come from Edom in crimson garments from Basra?" He's describing that. He's in the valley of decision, trampling out, leaving their lifeblood on the earth. And so when you get here and it says his clothes are dipped in blood, I always thought, oh, like it's reminiscent of the cross. No. He's been stomping people like grapes. That's the imagery. "And the name by which he is called is the Word of God. And the armies of heaven, arrayed in fine linen, pure and white, were following him on white horses. From his mouth comes a sharp sword with which to strike down the nations, and he rules them with a rod of iron." How many times have you heard that and not made the connection? A rod of iron? That's not a shepherd's hook that he lifts up the poor little sheep with, right? This is a little different imagery of Jesus. "He will tread the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God the Almighty." No mystery as to who this is describing, right? This is Jesus who is treading the winepress of the fury, whose clothes are splattered in blood, and who is carrying a rod of iron. If you just keep reading on the same section, "On his robe and on his thigh he has a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Then I saw an angel standing in the sun with a loud voice. He called to all the birds that fly directly overhead, 'Come, gather for this great supper of God, to eat the flesh of kings and the flesh of captains, the flesh of mighty men, the flesh of horses and their riders, and the flesh of all men, both free and slave, both small and great.'" Why is he calling all these birds? Because there's a lot of dead bodies that need to be cleaned up. That I wanted to do this last week related to Christmas. Christ coming, yes, and this is the other one. It's a little different than the first time. Go ahead.
Would those people then that he's trampled, would their souls still go to the lake of fire then? Or
Yes.
are they obliterated?
No.
entirely?
No one's ever obliterated. They all go to Hades, kind of the temporary holding place of the dead, and then there's the great white throne judgment at the end where they are judged based on their works, and they are then thrown into the lake of fire. They don't have as long to wait because they die at the very end, but yeah. So what is meant by the great winepress of the wrath of God? It's Christ's final judgment on the ungodly, and I think it is the battle of Armageddon is really what's being described, and we'll deal with Armageddon in more detail when we get to it. I'll go back. This last passage here, the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood flowed from the winepress as high as the horse's bridle for 1,600 stadia. Let me flip back so if you can keep writing if you need to while I talk about that. The 1600 stadia, it depends on how you measure a stadia, and there's some discrepancy, but it's somewhere between 170 and 200 miles. And there's a place in Israel where that's about like the length top to bottom, and so it all kind of fits. This whole idea of it being as high as the horse's bridle, I mean, we're talking trillions of gallons of blood, so it's probably not a valley 4 feet deep with blood. That's probably not what's being described. It could be some sort of a channel that's been cut that's 4 feet deep, but more likely it's the blood is simply splattering as high as horses' bridles. It's just everything's like coated in blood from the bloodbath is more likely what's being described there. Go ahead.
Many years ago, when me and my wife went to Israel, I had the greatness of standing on the wall of Ahab and Jezebel's kingdom. The wall, some of the wall was still there, okay?
Yeah.
Place of sacrifice and everything. But anyway, I looked through the tree area and I could see this valley, the Valley of Jehoshaphat.
Yeah.
I guess they call it the Valley of Megiddo,
Yep.
the Valley of Jezreel,
Yeah.
and it is below Nazareth, okay? The valley looked to be, could be maybe 3 miles wide, maybe, it's
Yeah.
fairly wide. But when I seen that the 1,600 furlongs was 175 miles,
Yeah.
I didn't know whether Israel was 175 miles wide.
Not wide, but long from top to bottom, north to south. And I think it does, depending on which description you're using in terms of length, it can actually extend slightly beyond. But like Basra's, if I'm remembering correctly, isn't in Israel.
Right.
So therefore it could stretch from Basra to all the way up to the north, that kind of thing is probably what's being described there.
That's what I'm maybe thinking
Yeah,
too.
yeah,
Because what I seen, that this valley was more or less running from east, or from west to east, or east to
Yeah,
west,
yeah. yeah.
And so I was thinking maybe it did extend into the borders of what Israel is now, but beyond that.
Yeah, I think you're right. So let me ask this question. I added it late, and I just think it's an important thing to see. Why is this such a different picture of Christ? Why is this so different, and why do we never hear this? My first answer is because we don't know our Bible. Sadly, that's part of it. Let me show you this, a couple things here real quick as we conclude. This is Joshua, and he's right before he goes into Jericho. So this is clearly Old Testament. And by the way, in case you're unfamiliar with this, Jesus shows up multiple times in the Old Testament. I think they're called Christophanies, if I'm remembering it right. Generally, he's referred to as the angel of the Lord. Anytime you see the angel of the Lord, the specific, that one, it's God, it's Jesus. And you see that when you're reading it, it's like, okay, that has to be a God, because he's like being worshipped, and no angel ever lets himself be worshipped. This one, it doesn't say the angel of the Lord, but you'll see why I say I think this is Jesus. When Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing before him with his drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" And he said, "No, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord." Commander of the army of the Lord. Does that reminisce to right here, let's see, verse 14, right in the middle, and the armies of heaven arrayed in fine linen. He's leading the armies of heaven. Who's leading them? The commander of the armies of the Lord. He's been the commander of the Lord's army, by the way, for a long time. It's not a new thing in Revelation 19. Now I have come, and Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped and said to him, "What does my Lord say to his servant?" Every angel would have stopped him in his tracks. No, I'm a fellow servant, get up. It's bad. I mean, it's idolatry. Don't dare you do, that's not right. John gets that a couple of times when he tries to worship an angel and is rebuked for it. What is this guy's response? And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, take off your sandals for your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. Burning bush, ring a bell. You're on holy ground, take off your sandals, Moses. This is Joshua's burning bush moment. He meets the incarnate Christ right before they go in and start to take the land. It's an often overlooked one because it doesn't mention the angel of the Lord here. He's called something different. What I want you to notice, he's standing there with a sword drawn. I mean, this guy is serious business, and they come in and they walk around Jericho, and everybody, they conquer it. Who's conquering it? Well, certainly not the Israelites. They're not even doing anything. This is who's conquering Jericho, the commander of the Lord's army. 2 Kings 19, let me see this. Therefore, thus saith the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, he shall not come into this city, or shoot an arrow there, or come before it with a shield, or cast up a siege mount against it. By the way that he came, by the same he shall return, and he shall not come into this city, declares the Lord. For I will defend this city to save it, for my own sake and for the sake of my servant David. So God is saying, I'm going to do this. And that night, the angel of the Lord, Jesus, went out and struck down 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. That's phenomenal. That's like 70% of the population of Fort Wayne in a night. He's not just a warrior, he's a warrior. And when people arose early in the morning, behold, these were all dead bodies. Then Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and went home and lived in Nineveh. I'm out. You're done. I'm gone. He's at it, right? That's Jesus. He just wiped out 185,000 Assyrians. Let me show you this to you differently. This is Luke 4. This is really at the very beginning of Jesus' ministry. He's in Nazareth, his kind of hometown. And he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And as was his custom, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and he stood to read. And the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it is written, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind. He set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And he rolled up the scroll and gave it back to the attendant and sat down. And the eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. And he began to say to them, today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. His claim is to be this Messiah figure, right? It totally angers them. They want to kill him. They drive him out of the city. What I want you to notice, it says he was reading from the scroll of Isaiah, right? So let's go to Isaiah. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to the blind, or to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and to open the prisons to those who are bound, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to grant those who mourn in Zion, to give them a beautiful headdress instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the garment of praise instead of a faint spirit, that they may be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that they may be glorified. So one thing you notice is there's a lot more here than what he read, right? What I want you to notice is when he's reading it, he says there in verse 2, just above the highlighted, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, and rolled up the scroll. What he didn't say was, and the day of vengeance of our God. Now, we kind of give the Jews of the first century a hard time for not having figured out who he was. Would you have guessed that that little comma would last 2,000 years? Probably not. That's what's happening. There's a comma that separates literally 2,000 years of the work of Messiah. He comes and he declares the year of the Lord's favor and stops reading because that's all he's here to fulfill. He's going to do the rest, just not today. That is one of the most, I discovered this years ago and was just kind of blown away by how detailed and how specific the scriptures are. Literally commas can represent thousands of years. And the only way we would know that is by looking at the entire Bible. I mean, I can't figure that out on my own. There's no way anybody could, right? But we see this is what he's doing. Okay, now here's what he's doing. And he clues us in by reading a text, stopping in the middle and saying, that I just did. So now you know, okay, wait a minute, there's more here. When's that? That starts to create the question. That should have created some question for them, and that it did not. Why is this picture so different? For Christ's first coming was as a lamb, and his second coming is as a lion. It's just a poetic way of saying he's coming twice. First as the meek, the humble, living as a poor, child in the house of a rather poor Jewish couple in Nazareth, right? With nowhere to lay his head, he tells us. The Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. So that's his first one. The second, he's coming to trample out the blood of the unrighteous. He's coming to be a fortress for those that are his.
Chris?
Yeah.
I think an answer to that is it's not popular anymore. I mean, back when I was a kid, it was known as fire and brimstone preaching.
Yeah.
And we used to think of the Southern Baptists that way, that the Bible thumpers coming down into the aisle and screaming and yelling and preaching what's coming. And it's not done anymore. It's not popular. From what I'm seeing of the Southern Baptists, they're going almost a whole different direction, some factions of it. So I think it's true, but it's not well, I know it's true, but it's not popular anymore. When you think of blood and guts movies, I mean, the worst one and I don't care to watch them, but I've seen some, and this is so far beyond any movie you've ever seen.
Right.
Even with computer graphics, it's hard to portray this, and so it's just not popular to think of Jesus like this. Yeah. And it's not preached anymore.
Let me show you this. I thought through how to do this. Jesus Christ is the holy, righteous, sovereign, just, powerful, merciful, gracious, loving God who hates sin and who loves to save sinners who trust in him and will righteously judge those who don't. Okay? That is what American churches look like. Jesus Christ is the merciful, gracious, loving God who loves to save sinners who trust him. And you just don't talk about the rest of it. And if you see the whole picture, it enrages you. It makes you angry that why are you not telling the story, right? So we do, Jesus Christ is the holy, righteous, sovereign, just, powerful God who hates sin and will righteously judge those who don't trust him. I would argue those are both idolatry. Why do I say idolatry? Because you're worshiping half of the truth. You're worshiping a God of your own image that you would rather have. I'd like him to be I want syrup. I want, rod of iron, right? And the reality is that. And we have to see all of who Christ is presented to be. Jesus Christ is the holy, righteous, sovereign, just, powerful, merciful, gracious, loving God who hates sin and who loves to save sinners who trust him and will righteously judge those who don't. The whole picture is what's needed to be seen. There's a verse, I thought of it late and I didn't add it. It is a fearful thing to be in the hands of, I think it's a righteous God. A pastor years ago changed it to sinners in the hand of an angry God. He took it from that passage. But it is a very fearful thing to be found in the hands of a righteous God. And we just saw this morning why. There's blood splatter 4 feet high for 200 miles. That's the vengeance that he will bring. Go ahead.
I think, my opinion is, I think this generation or even the younger generation, they're so fearful of showing who true Jesus Christ is. If they try to, talk to their friends about it, they want to say, oh, he's loving, he'll forgive you, because of that fear of the rejection.
Yes.
And, that whole.
No, and that's been, I think that's always been the desire of why, because you don't want to be seen as the firebrand. I mean, John the Baptist was not popular, right? Elijah was not popular. Jeremiah, if I remember right, they killed him. They were so sick of hearing it. I mean, that you killed the prophets, Jesus says to the religious leaders. So it's always been a very unpopular thing to speak the truth, right? The difference, I think, now is, with the snowflake generation, and I don't want to pick on them because that's, how many of you in here are willing to go be bold, right? We're not the snowflake generation, and yet we're still a bunch of cowards. Shame on us, right? So, yeah, the whole picture is what we need to see, because then we are more likely to, I think, in a fear of the Lord, we're more likely to speak truth. Go ahead back here.
I think, and it saddens me that a lot of ministry is candy-coated nowadays, and when I do share the gospel with people, I do talk about hell.
Yes.
Okay, I must.
Yeah.
It's something that burns within me, because it's not God's desire that anyone would go there.
Yeah. Yeah. The whole idea of a carrot and a stick was not some, originated by a parenting coach. That's God's idea. Hell and heaven. Grace and judgment. Carrot and stick. He uses both. He is a loving God, and he loves to save sinners. And he will righteously judge those who don't trust him. Let me pray for us, and then I will hang out and talk more. Dear Heavenly Father, as always, we're really grateful for your word. We're grateful that you have given us your entire revelation within the scripture. It all is one story written by one author. You knew what you were doing, and when you had Joel write what he wrote and Isaiah write what he wrote, because you knew you were going to have John write what he wrote. We are grateful for those who have come before us that have been able to help us make all those connections so that we can find these passages and pull all the puzzle pieces together and see a clearer picture. We remember when we started this series in Revelation, it starts with the revelation of Jesus Christ. And we talked about how this study, more than any other, will show us a more accurate picture of who Christ is. And this morning, that thought resonates more true than I would have imagined in week one. Lord, help us to see truth and take that truth and share it. Not be ashamed, not be hesitant, that we would be gracious and kind with the delivery, but that we would speak the truth. And we pray that we would all do that in a way that brings you glory and honor, and we pray all these things in Jesus' name.